Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 385, Masonic Odes and Poems. This is 159 pages, so it's relatively long compared to some works. An intermediate to long work, and link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books, blogs. This is recommended if you like the poetry and song side of the occult. You'll like this, and anything if you've got an interest in the Freemasons. Most of the poetry in here is it's in rhyming verse. It's not like, slam poetry or something. Considering it was made in the middle of the 19th century, is a little bit more finesse back then than there is now in the modern art cafe section. Most of it is spiritual, although not all of it. Some of it's civic. I'll get to that as well. And so it uses a lot of symbolism, like the concept of the square, the ashlar, or the sort of board on which, the stone on which things are cut and measured, the level and all these things. There's a lot of allusions, of course, to the all-seeing eye and all of this other symbolism that's very profuse. It's mostly spiritual. A lot of poems about death and about loss, too. There's one called The Decaying Lodge, actually, that sort of sticks. And it's about a lodge that's it's disheveled and it's no longer in use, and it's echoing with the sounds of happiness, but now they're like degrading into the ground and stuff. Interesting. And through the verses in here, it's almost, some of it is meant to teach initiates. So it talks about like the pillars and the meaning of the symbolism. It's actually explicitly described. Now, what you're not going to get is a bunch of conspiratorial devil worship and shit like that. The Freemasons, especially this time, are by and large Christians. Bible-believing, fairly religious Christians, actually. They've extended now, and now they allow other monotheists, I think, into the Freemasons, although their order has been in descent in numbers for quite some decades. It peaks basically in the 1920s or 30s, and then, when the atomic era begins, people showed less interest in gentlemen's clubs and so-called secret societies, although it's not particularly secretive. Their literature is freely available. Masonic shorthand, on the other hand, is a little bit odd, but it's basically like a secretary. Anyway, I liked this. The poetic collection is good. The other part is civic. There are several poems talking about people like George Washington, Ben Franklin, etc. There's a lot of Washington worship. Now, part of that is the time period in which this is actually written. This comes from the mid-19th century. Big civic revival at the time, and so that would have been not out of place. I don't know whether the civic side of things is still particularly in the Freemasons, but as far as being like the Americanized proto-Christian group of monotheists that are meant to be good citizens, and they're very profuse in that during the anti-Masonic times several decades prior to this, the 1820s and 30s, if I remember correctly. Big upswelling of anti-Masonic sentiment in parts of the world. It fits in the context, but mostly spiritual. Some symbolism, a lot of death and grieving, and then a lot of things that are like almost like party songs. Like you'd think of the Shriners, they're going to the bar, I guess. Songs basically hallelujah. So there's a little bit of a bipolar feel to it, where some of the poems are kind of gloomy, and some of them are like really over the top. So, raise the square, raise the ashlar, the Lord cometh, and stuff like that. It's kind of amusing as well. And at the end, there's actually a bit of sheet music that I popped in there. I literally took the image from the initial scanned file, because it was like, I'm not going to be able to render this because I don't know that you can do that on a word processor. I just popped it in there, and I don't read sheet music, so I have no idea what the song sounds like, so somebody maybe can look that up and see if there's a version on the internet. Maybe somebody can make an instrumental. That would be very, very funny. So highly recommended if you like poetry with a spiritual bent, or if you like some of the gloomy side of poetry at times, you'll like this. If you're interested in studying the Freemasons, I haven't seen other comparable compendiums of their poetry. And this comes from, by the way, multiple lodges over multiple spans of time. One of them is dedicated to the first Grand Master of the Maine Vermont Lodge, so I thought that was funny. I'm like, yeah, so it's a little relic of home back in the United States. Again, link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books, blogs. I would recommend it if you're into the Freemasons or poetry. It's quite interesting. You can Rhyme along with the poems. Have a good time. Read it as a bedtime story to your monotheistic child. That's about all. Peace out.